The reconciliation of heaven and hell. Welcome. You might realise that I have a somewhat ambivalent or agnostic view of hell. I mean, at times I'll refer to hell, but at others I'll describe it as a metaphor or simply being removed from God. And now I have to say where this ambivalence comes from. You know, I've suffered from 12 years of black magic, and of course I explored heaven and hell, good and evil, the devil and Satan. But my ambivalence comes from having studied it rather than having not given it much consideration. So when I refer to it, I realise that many of you will hold a view that is probably similar to that I held before I did all this study, and that's what I'm referring to help you to understand. I guess my ambivalence is best summed up through a quote that I've used before by Rabia of Basra. "Oh God, if I worship you for fear of hell, burn me in hell. And if I worship you in hope of paradise, exclude me from paradise. But if I worship you for your own sake, grudge me not your everlasting beauty." The origins of hell. Rather surprisingly, the origins are far from straightforward. I mean, the English word hell is definitely of Germanic pagan origin. And this was developed in the Middle Ages, merged with biblical references, largely from the New Testament. Although at this point I should also mention the Celtic concept of Uffern. Often the origin of the concept of hell, people believe, comes from the Jewish notion of Gehanna. And this was influential during the Second Temple period as a part of apocalyptic sects. And such views have been incorporated into Kabbalism. But even so, it's seen more as a waiting room for souls, rather than the sort of place of torment that it's become. Having said that, many Jews are equally ambivalent regarding hell. Indeed, neither the Talmud nor the Old Testament directly refers to anything like that vision of hell that emerged in medieval Christian times. Having said all this, it would be wrong to assume that all Christians, and indeed all Christian denominations, share a common view of hell. So for Catholics, hell is a state of definitive self-exclusion from communication with God and the blessed. Now, some might point to Babylonian beliefs regarding the underworld or Kur on Judaism, and that maybe there are some. But most, this appears to give rise to a belief that there are gates to hell. And indeed, numerous locations around the world claiming this dubious accolade. More likely, the Jews were influenced by Greek notions of Hades, which was developed by the Romans to become Tartarus. Which itself, I think I'm meaning the Greeks here. The Greeks may have been influenced by ancient Egyptian beliefs in the afterlife, especially the Book of Dead, and the inverse to the afterlife, the lake of fire. I mean, I should also mention that Hindus, Jains, Buddhists all have concepts of Naraka. So, having said that I'm most ambivalent towards it, it does seem to be a theme that stretches across cultures and religions. It's just in its shape that people dogmatically state that it is, that I find that, I have real difficulty with it. And particularly because you cannot trace a definitive antecedent to it. The Divine Comedy, The Divine Comedy is an Italian narrative poem by Dante Alighieri. It was completed in 1320, and it was highly influential on medieval Christian concept of hell, despite probably being as much influenced by Roman philosophy as the Christian tradition. It describes Inferno or hell, Purgatorio or purgatory, a temporary place for souls who are not immediately admitted to paradise, and Paradiso or paradise. Hell itself is divided into 9 circles, which themselves are sometimes divided into circles, depending on the sin committed. Each of these circles has an associated demon, and therefore Dante applies a hierarchy of demons, which of course are so commonly found in magical traditions, and indeed form the basis of an awful lot of magical traditions. The first circle is limbo, which contains non-believers, and of course this would include the Greek and Roman philosophers who clearly influenced Dante, and Dante's own guide through hell, or fictional guide through hell, Virgil. And the deeper one gets into hell, the punishments become, unsurprisingly, more severe. The most grave sins, however, are fraud and treachery, and not murder. I mean, murder's still quite bad, but worse still are fraud and treachery. And this strangely echoes my own divination that lying is a greater sin in the paranormal than murder itself. Now, whilst I cannot blame Dante for the interconnection of hell with angels, demons, Satan, and indeed heaven, he certainly placed these within the sort of popular imagination. But it's this bit that makes me uneasy. Whilst I might be prepared to accept some of the concepts within the Divine Comedy, I cannot accept its literal interpretation, and with it its consequences. Do you know, I always balk at making things up. You know, I remember my first ever job, and I was asked to, can you design a system for this? And it's like, I don't think I should. You know, I don't feel as though I'm qualified to do it. And I think it's the same thing, you know, that from very noble concepts by Dante, we've got this sort of hierarchy. I mean, don't get me wrong, the hierarchy of demons occurs in many other places, but we have this hierarchy of demons, we have this interplay between heaven and hell, angels and demons and Satan. And people just interpret it absolutely literally, like, that's it, that's how it is, and they will argue with you on it. And that's what I have a problem with. I suppose, to put it another way, to accept Protestant, and I use the word Protestant meaning both Catholic and Islamic, even though it's not a word often used in Islam, but Protestant notions of hell, one has to accept a whole canon of theology, including heaven, angels, demons and Satans. And I think I'm unwilling to do that. Or at least, literally, I'm unwilling to do that. Paradise Lost. Well, Paradise Lost is an epic poem in blank verse by the 17th century English poet John Milton, and it was published in 1667. Now, I have to say, I absolutely love Paradise Lost. However, it concerns the biblical story of the fall of man, the temptation of Adam and Eve by the fallen angel Satan, and their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And this causes Adam and Eve to have a less direct relationship with God. So again, I'm absolutely fine with it at an allegorical level. But when taken literally, I have severe problems that you have to link. Now you're also linking Satan with hell, with the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, etc. Like, you've got to believe in all of them for one to be true. What I love about what I love about Milton is his Satan is the ultimate seducer. He's a Heathcliff-like character, A Heathcliff-like character which my heroes, the English Romantics, saw as something of a hero. So as I say, don't take Paradise Lost lightly, but maybe not literally, please. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is a book by English poet, printmaker, and my hero. I mean, I'm always saying that this person's my hero, that person's my hero, but, you know, it doesn't get much higher than William Blake. And he composed it between 1790 and 1793. It's a direct reference to Heaven and Hell, a book written by Emanuel Swedenborg, which was published in 1758. And of course, Blake himself was a follower of Emanuel Swedenborg's New Church. Like some Cajawan believers, Swedenborg suggests that heaven and hell are in fact here on earth. In fact, he describes London in this manner. So Swedenborg says, heaven is not located on high, but where the good of love is, and resides within a person, wherever he or she might be. Swedenborg also suggests that the Lord casts no one down to hell, but the Spirit casts himself hither. Now, this is a concept that is repeated by many scholars and theologians, and one that I've got an awful lot of time for. So, unlike the hells of Milton and Dante, Blake's concept of hell begins not as a place of punishment, but a source of unrepressed, somewhat Dionysian energy, opposed to the authoritarian and regulated perceptions of heaven. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate, and all necessary to human existence. From these contraries spring what religions call good and evil. Good is the passive that obeys reason. Evil is the active springing from energy. Good is heaven, evil is hell. So Blake really reverses the Protestant Christian notion of hell. Hell being full of energy and delight, but ultimately therefore temptation. Indeed, he suggests that we can only know what is good by experiencing what is wrong. Rather than focusing on laws, Blake encourages us to put the heart first. That as individuals we must be able to freely express ourselves, to construct our own reality. Indeed, he says there is only one way, and that is your way. There is only one salvation, and that is your salvation. And the book includes the prophetic lines that, well, I just think they're wonderful. If the doors of perceptions were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks in his cavern. Isn't it brilliant? It's brilliant, isn't it? I just love him. I just love him. Gehanna in Islam. In Islam, Gehanna, from the Hebrew word Gehanna, is the counterpart to heaven. Is the counterpart to hell, and is likewise. It is the counterpart to heaven, and is likewise divided into 7 layers, both coexisting with a temporal world, filled with blazing fire, boiling water, and a variety of other torments for those who've been condemned to it in the hereafter. In Al-Quran, God declares that the fires of Jahannam is prepared for both mankind and jinn, and that after the day of judgment is to be occupied by those who do not believe in God, and those who've disobeyed his laws or rejected his messengers. Enemies of Islam are sent immediately to hell upon their deaths. Now this sort of imagery does have a profound effect on Muslims. A very good friend of mine was Bugis, so from Makassar area in Indonesia. And the Bugis have 6 genders. And he belonged to one of these intermittent 6 genders. So you would, well, Westerners would describe him as gay. And he was, nevertheless, a very devout Muslim. And he actually died of AIDS, and before he died, he went on Umrah. But he always used to show us these pictures, these Islamic pictures of Gehanna, showing people being tormented by having red-hot pokers stuck up their backsides. And he was frightened to death of it, he really was. So many Muslims do hold such views. And these views, of course, have been developed by some Muslims to incorporate notions from the Divine Comedy. Although I have to say, the Divine Comedy was itself influenced by some Islamic traditions, probably especially Kitab al-Miraj. And indeed, they're influenced. These Muslims are influenced by Paradise Lost. And they suggest that anyone not believing in hell is not a true Muslim. Whereas I believe that anyone who claims that others are not true Muslims should explore their own motivation prior to condemning. In other words, the plank in their eye before the sawdust of others. Certainly within Sufism, hell is seen as an internalized hell, a hell of one's own consciousness. Whilst many Kajawan believers see both heaven as hell as being on this earth, may be best illustrated by Rabbi Haim of Robishuk's allegory, in which in each location the inhabitants are given access to food, but the utensils are too long to serve oneself. In hell, people can't cooperate and consequently starve. In heaven, the divine diners feed one another across the table and are sated. And now, whilst many Muslims would take issue with these concepts, Al-Quran does mention 7 earths, one of which has developed to Adim or Ramaka, the surface on which humans, animals and jinn live. The Red Book is a red leather-bound folio of manuscripts put together by the Swiss psychiatrist Gustav Carl Jung between 1914 and 1930. It recounts and comments upon the author's psychological experiments between around 1913 and 16, and is based on manuscripts journals known as the Black Books, first drafted by Jung in 1913 to 1915 and 1917. However, it was not published or made otherwise available for study until 2009. It sort of reflects on Schopenhauer's and Nietzsche, whereby Jung explores the journey from hell to heaven, suggesting that we can only experience heaven by experiencing hell. That the descent into hell, the underworld, is a descent into one's unconscious. In other words, we need to integrate the shadow self with the self to be individuated. A union, if you like, of the conscious and the unconscious. Indeed, whilst he meets the devil, he realises that the devil is his own shadow. In some respects, I suppose you could say this is similar to tantric beliefs, and the need to unite the left-handed and the right-handed paths. So we can see hell, if you like, as being a part of personal alchemy. That notions of heaven and hell and Satan, etc., are all notions so that we can unite the self, integrate the self, and become individuated. Concluding thoughts. You can probably tell that I find hell to be a useful metaphor. A metaphor for our shadow side, for the darkness that is within us all. Indeed, maybe it is this very shadow side which creates the evil that so many of us experience on this earth. But really it is a mirror on the self. So yes, we must experience hell to become closer to God, or you might like to say heaven. And maybe my own suffering from being a victim of black magic unlocked my own awakening and movement towards God. Although I probably started to embrace God before it, but maybe again it's all linked. Therefore I see notions of heaven and hell as metaphors for my own personal alchemy. So yes, we must reconcile heaven and hell. I certainly have some sympathy with those Conjowans and Swedenborg who see heaven and hell as being on this earth. But I probably see it in a more spiritual or psychological way than material. What I mean is that by rejecting materialism and suppressing the ego, we become closer to God and therefore experience a heaven. Whilst those who are proud and greedy see others as evil, experiencing earth as hell. Remember the long spoons, of some feeding, unable to feed themselves and others helping, I think it's that. As you know, I've also speculated that psychopaths, narcissists, are reborn spirits experiencing their own hell. It is the hell because they have no trust in their fellow man, and therefore everyone's to be feared, creating a hell of fear and hatred. But it's a hell of fear and hatred that is their own shadow. Of course, I've also talked extensively about having found the light, and the darkness is a lack of light and not its opposite. So for me, Satan is simply an absence of God, not God's opponent. Evil, and I don't like the word evil as you possibly know, is simply not submitting to God. So to me, evil is a lack of good. That's why I don't like the word evil. Don't mind you saying bad, but evil's too strong. And therefore, hell is not being close to God. Well, I hope you've got something from this. I dare say it's challenged many of you, but I hope you understand I've tried to be firm. Yes, some is conjecture, but I have tried to base this on what I can glean as being facts, and I've tried to be fair in presenting them. It's a part of the real magic of Java, which originally I thought would show rituals in Java and would only be cut every 2 or 3 months. But what I decided to do was expand the concept to talk about things of interest. So now it's happening every 2 or 3 days. So if you have enjoyed this, or at least got something from it, if you can pass a comment and hit the like button, and if you've really enjoyed it, if you could subscribe to my channel, hit the bell and you'll get future notifications. And what I want to do is thank you so much in anticipation for that.